Okay, welcome back. We're going to resume with ARIN Policy 2014-2, improving 8.4 anti-flip language. And I want to point out that we have an hour and 20 minutes. Yeah. To get through these. So, history, January 2014, new policy proposal, Bill Dart, Owen DeLon, and the Shepherds. The policy text you have in front of you and online. Same questions as always. Is this fair and impartial, technically sound, and supported by the community? Problem statement. Current language. Source entities within the ARIN region must not have received a transfer, allocation, or assignment of IPv number resources from ARIN for 12 months prior to approval of transfer request. This restriction does not apply to M&A transfers. So I'm going to have, actually now that it occurs to me, I'm going to have Dan get up and do this. Go ahead, Dan.
Good morning. So the gist of what the author of this proposal is suggesting is that when the anti-flip language was originally incorporated into the transfer requirements, the intent was so that people wouldn't obtain an allocation from ARIN, then turn around and sell it, and then go back for more. But what they're suggesting is that the current wording poses a problem in that large companies with subsidiaries and that are a collection of organizations, they can't transfer blocks within themselves because they run up against this anti-flipping language. So what they had proposed is to add the red text to the existing section to exempt the transfers within organizations and their subsidiaries. And that is the gist of the change. So the questions become, should an organization be barred from transferring an existing block to another RIR as part of a reorganization just because they've received assignments? Or does the clause and its subsidiaries open this policy language to abuse? And based on your opinion, if you have any suggestions for alternative wording.
Sorry. Thank you for being so succinct and trying to get us back on track. Invite if anybody in the room would like to comment on this. I see Mr. Howard standing. Thank you, sir.
Lee Howard, fulfilling my regular role. Can you actually flip back to the proposed language? It's only one sentence. This looks to me like the intent of this proposal is to affect organizations rather than blocks, and my understanding of the anti-flipping language is that it would affect blocks. And the idea is, gee, if you've been able to convince somebody to transfer a block of addresses to you, then you shouldn't be able to flip that same block of addresses. That should be locked down for 12 months, I guess it is. And it doesn't affect M&A transfers, which is sort of implied, that's current language, which is sort of an implied question, I thought, in the next slide about open questions. So I guess what I'd like to see is a restriction on transferring blocks of addresses rather than what organizations can do.
So you propose an anti-flipping approach, which is based on a block that has been transferred being prohibited from transfer for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
Okay, but that's actually not what the current language says. The current language is the language in black, which simply applies to organizations. So this enhances the current language and the current approach, propose a different tack on it, which may or may not be better, but is a different way of solving that problem.
I will go further and opine that this is completely the wrong approach.
Okay. By the way, sorry, Susan, is this mic now? We're good for the streaming, or do I need to use this one as well? I'll just try for this. Remote participants can't hear me, let me know. Next.
Scott Labran, ARIN AC, responding to Lee's comment. The language that's in black that is current policy was intended to prevent the case where someone has a bunch of space, gets a new block from ARIN, and then goes and sells off their other space that they already have. So this is based on the idea that IP addresses can be somewhat fungible if you have dynamic addressing and such. And so just restricting the individual block that you receive from then being transferred out doesn't fix the problem if you have another block that you can just transfer instead. So that's the reason for the current black text. The proposal here asserts that that is a too restrictive form of anti-flipping, and that there should be a caveat that if you're not going and selling it off on the market to someone else, but you're just transferring it to your own subsidiary, that should be fine. Now, the language that you're talking about, I think actually might be in the other side of the transfer policy already. There may be a individual block anti-flipping. There are two different types of anti-flipping language in Section 8 already. This is one of them, and the author feels that it's too restrictive and wants to relax it. So that's the part that we're discussing, but I think the block-based stuff is already elsewhere or was considered and deemed to be not good enough when we originally did 8.3.
Mr. Lybrand, your view on, is that just a comment, or do you have a view on the proposal as well?
That's a comment. As a member of the AC, I haven't yet formed an opinion on this, and I'm looking for community feedback.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. You escaped, unfortunately, without stating as such, I believe. Okay. Oh, yes, you're quite right. As you say that, ring.
I heard it.
He is quite correct. Let me just turn on the right brain again. There we go. Thank you.
Brandon Ross, Network Utility Force. I am staunchly against this policy. I believe that anything that reduces the liquidity of IPv4 space trading hurts all of us and makes it more difficult to continue propping up IPv4 for as long as we need to get to be.
Okay. Opposed. Got it that time for sure.
Did you get that?
Yeah, I got that time. I apologize, Mr. Howard.
I'm opposed.
Again, don't all approach the mics at once, and if we have any remote participants, perhaps. Hopefully they can hear. Well, I've been told to switch back to this mic, so they can hear it. They can hear me. Too bad for them. More feedback? None? Standing up halfway, maybe? Again?
It's been pointed out to me that I may have misinterpreted the policy, so I'll need to reread it. So you can withdraw my objection for now.
So withdrawn. So we'll close the mics or ask anyone remotely to start typing, seeing shaking of head. Your homies are quiet. I'll need a moment after that. So I think we've gotten some feedback on this, unless Mr. Sweeting, you'd like any further feedback for the AC? Okay. Thank you all for your consideration on this, and I'll turn it back over to John.
Thank you. I remind everyone to speak close to the mics when you're speaking. Oh.
You got a live one?
Andrew Dull, comment. This policy proposal makes a significant change to the ability of an organization to transfer a block outside the ARIN service region. Until the inter-RIR transfer policy was adopted, the ability of an organization to move their block to another region was largely restricted.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll now turn it over to John again.
Okay, we're going to pick up on schedule. Next policy proposal is draft policy 2000. Remove the 8.2, 8.3, and 8.4 minimum IPv4 block size requirements. Okay, as noted, this is a new policy proposal submitted in January. The Shepherds are Owen DeLong and Bill Dart. It was accepted as a draft policy by the AC. It is a work in progress, and so the AC is trying to figure out if it's good number policy, is it fair and impartial, is it technically sound, and is it supported? I'll turn it over to Dan to give the AC presentation. That one works. Speak close to it.
So, on this one's actually even shorter than the previous one, because.
Okay.
So this one's actually a little shorter than even the other one, in that what the author is suggesting is in the current sections of the transfer proposals, there is a /24 minimum saying only blocks of a 24 or larger will actually be accepted as a transfer. What he's suggesting here is that that requirement be removed and any size be allowed. So essentially, section 8, 2, 3, and 4, just remove the sections that, or remove the clauses that say a minimum transfer size of a /24. So what we're soliciting here is opinions about whether that's a good idea, bad idea, and whether it should be allowed, and what are some of the implications.
Discuss, Mr. Howard.
It's great that you remember my name.
Lee.
Having to, come up and identify myself because that's the rules. Lee Howard. This is a terrible idea. Please don't do this. Would you like my opinion?
Are you in favor or against?
So this is essentially proposing that not only deck chairs, but individual components of deck chairs may be rearranged. This is stupid. V4 is dead. Deploy V6.
Thank you, Lee. Would anyone else like to concept here? It's a very simple proposal. Scott.
Scott Librand with Limelight Networks hat on, but mostly speaking for myself. Just not ARIN AC. I'm not speaking for them. Okay, for a while if you want. There are a number of organizations that have requested transfers of /32 because they don't understand how the internet works and they want their IP address. I think there are even individuals who have requested transfers of /32. These may or may not have gotten to ARIN as actual requests, but there are people who want to transfer their IP. I don't believe that our policy should allow such. If there is a good technical justification for reducing the minimum transfer size from 24 to something smaller, I might be in support of that, but eliminating it completely, I think, is a bad idea.
Thank you, Scott. Stacy, do we have any remote participation? Do you got one? Stacy will check her homies. I think I'm slightly uncomfortable saying that. I don't know why.
It's the suit.
It's true. We're going to be closing the mics if there's no feedback on this proposal. Stacy is shaking her head. I will turn it back then. Thank you very much for the feedback, and I will turn it over to John.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we're going to resume with draft policy ARIN 2014-4, which is remove the 425 web hosting policy. Okay. Another new policy proposal, January of this year. John Springer and Andrew Dull are the shepherds. It's in your discussion guide and available online. It has been posted to PPML and is presented for the community for discussion. The AC is looking for feedback regarding whether it's fair and impartial, technically sound, and supported by the community. And I will now turn it over to John Springer to do the AC presentation.
Thank you, John. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. So this may look familiar. This is an item that is substantially similar to something else we looked at earlier. The problem statement on this particular proposal is, draft policy, is Section 4.25 is technology-specific language that is not current with modern network operation needs and practices. We should remove it to make NRPM clearer. There's the current wording. It's been in place since July of 2001. It's, I say functionally identical to the last bullet item of 2013-7. The differing problem statement is there. The author has been asked and answered that he would specifically like it submitted and considered separately from 2013-7 and would like it considered independently. However, I think the AC, if we decide to move 2013-7 to recommended draft policy, we'll do something else with this. It should be noted that although the draft policy says that information will be collected and analyzed, that it has not been, and that it's not necessary to do so going forward. Does the community see a need for this information to be collected and possibly analyzed? Discuss.
Shocking presentation. No. Thank you, John Springer. And I did confirm also with John Sweeting, so yes, if obviously as a clarification, if 2013-7 was to be adopted, this would render this null. Yes, this is the author's wish, but it is effectively the same change, or part of, sorry, of 2013-7. So we have discussed this earlier, but I will open it up again if somebody wishes to bring up a new issue or comment. We did get some feedback on web hosting earlier today. Has the break and some caffeine changed anybody's views? Or if you could ask Stacy or homies if they've got anything. Lee Howard, even this will not cause you to. I've just got to give it a little time in case the snow is causing some increased latency, unfortunately, so we. Yes. Well, they don't protect it. They don't expect the snow. No. Okay, calling it once, twice, 3 times. Close. Thank you very much. I will turn it back over. Thank you, John Springer. Turn it over to John Kern. Too many John.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving right ahead. Next policy proposal is policy proposal, draft policy ARIN 2014-5, which is remove 7.2 lame delegations. Okay, introduced in January 2014, Stacy Hughes and Rod Seastrom are the Shepherds. It was accepted as a draft policy. The ARIN Advisory Council, it's available in your guide and online. It has been posted to BPML. The ARIN Advisory Council needs your feedback regarding whether it's good number policy, is it fair and impartial, is it technically sound, and is it supported by the community? And I will now turn it back to John Springer to do the AC presentation.
In case you haven't noticed, these are attempts to do some NRPM cleanup. Section 7.2 was established a decade ago, but the audit function that it requires were never put into place. The author asserts that lameness in adder is orthogonal to demonstrated need, and as such shouldn't be in policy. And how to run things like who is IRR components should not be in policy. There is the policy statement and implications. So generally we try to keep operational practice out of it in NRPM. A question for the community is there something special about inneradder.arpa that makes it different? And if so, does that extend to IP6.ARPA? Properly running an adder like the choice of an upstream provider may affect an ISP's end user experience, but is that any of ARIN's business? Anybody have anything to say?
Thank you, John Springer. You're all very quiet when it comes to removing sections. Interesting. Ask anyone online to quickly comment, or if someone in the room would like to speak, perhaps Lee Howard.
Sure, Lee Howard, I remember having this debate, what was it, 12 years ago?
No, not quite. This was actually my first policy proposal as a shepherd when I was back on the AC. I remember it well.
I remember having fairly emotional debates about how bad lameness was and that it was fundamentally broken, and I opposed this proposal.
Thank you, sir. Central mic.
Jeff Houston, APNIC. I don't really care whether you do this or not, so obviously. But I do note, however, in some recent work on securing the routing system, an alternative proposal to RPKI actually based itself completely in its trust model on the reverse DNS. And it was a thing I think called Rover, and the idea was it pushed information in a DNS sec signed reverse DNS and then pulled out credentials. So if we all walk from this, we're walking away from that as well, in theory. So just be aware that some folk have differing assumptions as to what the reverse DNS is good for, and you might not find that everyone wants to walk away at the same speed as you.
Thank you.
Frankly, I said don't care one way or the other.
Thank you, Jeff. Middle central microphone.
Scott Lybrand, question for staff and community. My impression from the PPML discussion is that since ARIN changed to using a per zone, per block model, that they haven't really been doing this per server based thing that we instructed them to do a decade ago or however long it's been. And therefore, removing this doesn't actually change operational practice. However, if, as Lee suggested, that is something that still is needed, or if, as Jeff suggested, there may be other reasons for doing something, it would seem that we actually need new guidance to ARIN as to what they should be doing in the new world of delegation of individual blocks. And it's hard to say this server is entirely bad if it's just this one block that's not responding, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we either need to get rid of this or we need to have a new proposal that does the opposite, but the current status quo is rather silly because we're instructing ARIN to do something they can't do, and that's dumb.
John Curran.
Yeah. In 2009, Mark gave a presentation at the ARIN meeting where he noted that the definition of lame for a server when what you're testing is individual zones is somewhat not canonical and therefore needed clarification from the community. If folks want to remove this from address policy, that clarifies the situation, obviously. If folks want us to do something here, it is possible for us to go to the step of marking servers for blocks that aren't responsive. Going to the next step of actual removal, I will say, once I understand what you're advocating, we need to do a legal review because it's not clear that removal of servers from records is a fair risk trade-off for ARIN to do. So what I need is I need either you guys to remove it or for you to indicate that you want to proceed with marking and or marking and stripping. One or the other, though I do agree, Scott.
And thanks to the good people at Google, just to clarify, it was 2005 that this policy went in. Rear microphone. Speaking of Google.
Heather Schiller, Google Fiber. The existing policy that we're proposing to remove altogether already says that you should remove lame servers. So I'm not sure why you're saying that you need legal review to remove lame servers when the policy already says you should remove lame servers.
If the community wants us to strip the DNS records of lame servers, I'd like a canonical definition of lame added to this policy. Because when we do that and someone comes back and says, you impacted our business, I want to say, yes, all you, impacted their business. And right now, you've not given us that canonical definition that can be coded. So, Heather, yes, but no.
So you're not doing what the community already asked you to do?
As reported in 2009, we can't, and we asked for a clearer definition then. So feel free to start working on it now.
Any other comments? Well, that was a lame discussion. Oh, come on. I've been waiting since 2005 to use that. No. And with that humorous moment, or lack thereof, we'll close the mics if there's no remote participation. Thank you, Stacy. Do my best Phil Donahue here and come into the audience with the...
The price is right.
Andrew Dull, question for operators. Do operators believe that one of ARIN's operational role is to provide feedback to operators on the status of their reverse DNS zones?
Given we're at Nanog and there are operators here, does anyone wish to address Andrew Dull's question? Left microphone.
Sure, Lee Howard. For pretty much any zone, if you have delegated a zone to me, and especially at my request, to the servers that I have designated, and that server proves to be unresponsive to for that delegation, then yeah, I think you ought to tell me that. I will also point out that I did do a quick search to see if there's an existing definition of lane delegation, and I didn't see one provided by IETF, but LACNIC has a pretty good version.
Thank you. Any other responses to Andrew Dull's question to operators? We have another one? And the remote AV is apparently non-functional. Refresh your browser. Of course, you need to have your AV working to hear me say that, but hopefully they can. Stacy will pass that on.
Mike Joseph, Google. I take no position on this particular proposal, but I would observe that removing servers for having a lame delegation pointed to them would be potentially problematic if someone else pointed the delegation to them.
Thank you. We're back. Thank you. But with that, I will close the microphones unless there's anyone else who wants to comment either on the policy or the question that Andrew quickly posed. Thank you all for your feedback. I'll pass it back to John Curran for the next item.
Excellent. So, we are moving ahead to draft policy ARIN 2014-6, remove section 7.1, maintaining in adder. Okay. Hey. Okay, policy proposal 198, introduced in January 2014. Rob Seistra and Stacey Hughes of the Shepherds. It's been accepted as a draft policy and posted online and in the discussion guide. It is a work in progress, and the AC needs your feedback on it regarding whether it's fair and impartial, technically sound, or supported by the community. And once again, I will turn it over to John Springer.
So, another NRPM cleanup policy proposal. The author observes that 7.1 attempts to dictate operational practice again for managing in adder.arpa, and operational practice ought to be in the NRPM. 7.1 is silent on IP6.arpa, which works fine, thus demonstrating that ARIN staff's technical judgment on implementation is, as usual, sufficient. Policy proposal recommendation is to remove 7.1 entirely. Again, operational practice generally doesn't go in the NRPM. Does the community feel that there's something about in adder.arpa that makes it different? And if such a condition exists, does it extend to IP6.arpa?
Over here this time. Thank you, John. More reverse DNS, more removal. Lee, you've been beat. Rear microphone.
Martin Hennigan, IP6, anybody? Like, we seem to be playing ping pong, these policies. So remove the inadder, put this back in, 2 policies for the same thing. What's going on? I mean, this stuff's been in the NRPM for years, and don't we have better things to do? Thanks.
Can I take that as non-support?
I could care less.
Chris Spears, Internet 2. So, IPv6 policy already delegates IP6.ARPA and 654.
Could you get a little closer? We're having trouble hearing.
So IPv6 policy, 654, I think, already delegates it to IP6.ARPA to the recipient. If we take out 7.2 or 7.1 or both, I think, of these 2 policies, then there's nothing guiding inadder.
John, is that your interpretation?
You said 7.5 presently does where?
654, I think. Sorry, 656. Reverse lookup. So
656, reverse up. 656 seems to be fairly clear that we delegate responsibility for the reverse lookup zone, and that service providers who do assignments out of an allocation in turn delegate to the assigning organization the responsibility if the assignee asks. It's fairly complete. You're saying it doesn't work without 7?
Well, so I'm saying if you remove this, then if you remove 7.1, this is the 7.1 or 7.2? Okay. So if you remove 7.1 or Section 7 entirely, so is there anything that speaks to inadder?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So the IPv6 policy currently addresses this.
Right,
IPv4
I
policy
see it.
doesn't.
It's the 4. It would be nice, I guess, to have language that actually relates to reverse lookup in the IPv4 policy to make it clear. And that's probably a good cleanup if Section 7 goes away.
Thank you.
Lee Howard. I would agree that parallelism, parallel construction of policies makes sense in this case, and I would like that to include reverse addressing, that if you're authoritative for addresses, then you ought to be authoritative for the zone.
Thank you. Well, there's a site for Sorai. I haven't seen you in a while.
Leo Bicknell, Farsight Security. Could you go back to the probably second? Yes. I just wanted to take issue with the bottom point. While I do not have off the top of my head the exact statistic for how much IPv6 has been deployed, I will quote Jeff Houston roughly earlier that it is a barren wasteland on the edges of the internet, I think is how he phrased it. I'm not sure that taking the current state of IPv6 as representative of, well, anything is a good idea. So that bullet point just struck me as all kinds of wrong.
And no view on the proposal? Just that's a comment, or?
I think Martin kind of touched more on my general thought. I think ARIN needs somewhere some policy on inadder.arpa. It is quite clear to me that there are many policy proposals attempting to adjust that in multiple ways, and depending on which are passed or do not pass, we could end up in a really good or a totally absurd place. And so, given that there are so many, I don't know how to take a position on one.
Your point is taken. Thank you. We'll close the mics if there's no remote participation. Yes, there is. Oh, there is remote. Oh, sorry, I thought I saw a shaking head there. Of course, anytime. Stacy Hughes.
Andrew Dull. At this time, I am opposed to this policy. While I agree the text is out of date and probably should be updated, I don't necessarily agree that the section should be removed. Reverse DNS is an important part of the services that ARIN provides to address holders. I believe that it is wholly appropriate for the NRPM, I got you, Andrew, to contain a section describing how ARIN should implement our DNS services to address holders.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, everyone, for your feedback on this. Thank you, John Springer. And turn over to John Kern. I think we've caught up on time.
Yes, we have. So, back on schedule here. We're going to move ahead to draft policy ARIN 2014-7, the section 4.4 microallocation conservation update. Very good. Okay, history was submitted as ARIN Proposal 200 in January 2014. Andrew Dull and Rob Seastrom are the shepherds. The policy text has been put online and is in your discussion guide. It is a draft policy that has been presented for community discussion. The AC needs your feedback regarding whether or not it's fair and impartial, technically sound, and supported by the community. I'm going to turn it over to Dan now, I think. Yes, Dan? Very good. And he'll give the AC presentation.
Hello again. So in this case, the suggested proposal is that the current wording of the policy for getting an allocation for an IXP is that at a minimum of 2 operators get together to justify an allocation from ARIN. What the suggestion that was raised was that this presents possible situations of abuse as the free pool gets depleted, and that it suggested that maybe that bar is set too low. So what the policy statement suggests is that the minimum requirement be raised from 2 to 3 to hopefully prevent that potential for abuse. There is actually a fair amount of discussion on the mailing list about this, so for those who enjoy that reading, it'd probably be a good visit to the mailing list. The 2 sides of the discussion have kind of settled around a number of people agree that the bar is too low and that it should be raised. One point that was made on the other side was for smaller countries in the ARIN region like the Caribbean who have a difficult time possibly getting 3 people together, that this could cause issues for them. So there is 2 sides to this discussion, and we're interested to hear more points of view from those in the room.
Last policy of the agenda here is some vibrant debate, hopefully. Bring us some vibrant debate.
Braden Ross, Network Utility Force. I'll just reiterate what I said on the mailing list, which is that if you're going to fake 2 companies, you can just as easily fake 3 companies, so this does nothing to prevent abuse. The tiny amount of address space we're talking about will do nothing to preserve the free pool for more than a few seconds. Therefore, I am against the change in policy. Is that a good start?
No, go ahead.
This is Dan. One other point that I'd offer to the room as information, while it doesn't suggest future behavior, just information for consideration, is looking at the ARIN websites. There's less than 70 allocations that have currently been made, for this purpose. So to give you an idea of scope.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Martin Hannigan, Open Ags Association. I am on the board of directors. I'm not necessarily expressing an opinion of the membership. Just wanted to point to the fact that there is an association that is tackling what is apparently the 3rd world condition of IXPs in North America, which includes the ARIN region. There's a standard that the community developed called OAX1, and there's a definition of what an IXP is. And it was fully debated within the community. There was a consensus process. There was public notice and all that fun stuff related to openness and transparency. With that said, I'm going to shift hats. And
since you mentioned that, did it relate to this change? Is there something in that policy that relates?
It was established before this policy was submitted to ARIN.
No, my question being, you brought that up, does the policy speak to the 2 or the 3?
The standard.
Sorry, the standard, my apologies.
OAS1 specifically states that an IXP is defined as 3 parties.
That's why I wanted to clarify. Thank you, go ahead.
So now I'm going to shift hats. I'm just going to speak Martin. I'm not representing anyone. I am the author of the proposal. The purpose of the proposal wasn't to combat abuse. It was to encourage conservation of the /16 that we have reserved for future growth and IXPs. As I previously mentioned, the state of IXPs is unusually broken in North America when you compare it to other regions in the world. And we're working very hard to improve that situation. As you probably are all aware, a number of IXPs have announced service in the states, New York, Virginia. There are public plans with respect to Chicago. We have a new entrant, Omaha. We're working closely with a number of parties. I'm also willing to work with parties in the Caribbean to help them to establish a minimum of 3 participants and bring the tomatoes to the soup, so to speak, and bring some content. In fact, we're actually doing that. The purpose of some of this work is to help people to establish these exchanges, not to thwart them. An observation that I have when you use, for example, the PCH NAP directory, and you go through and actually check on the entries in that directory, that the vast majority of the entries that are listed as 2 participants are either dead or the space is being used for that's being consumed personally. I proposed an alternative to this policy on the list. So one, the underlying text, I suggested that because there's already text like that in the existing policy. Don't really care if that goes away or not. If that's the purview of the staff or the board, that's fine by me. Secondly, I think that the alternative is that ARIN immediately, or we move to, and this is a big step for me, modify section 12 and start to conduct audits of people that get this space, and if they don't actually use it for its intended purpose or succeed, and again, success is key. I don't think we want to assign space with pending exhaustion to people that are not going to succeed. We should help them to succeed. We should do things like develop programs. For example, there's a pairing program being developed in OpenIX to help people fund these things and get certified and meet those minimum standards that the community was polled on, that said that this is what we want from IXPs. And granted, the Caribbean is what the objection seems to be about, and it is unique. And I think that a lot of people want to help to make things succeed, but I think that we need to start with some realistic criteria, and I think that this is fairly reasonable and simple, and that's it.
And you're supportive of the text that we...
Yeah, I support it. I mean, again, it's not about shutting down IXPs per se in the Caribbean. It's about using the resources properly and getting some successes.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Mike Joseph, Google. I oppose this policy. First, tackling the latter portion first. I believe that the existing 4.4 language oversteps the scope of the NRPM, and I believe that the underlined section here further oversteps the scope. It should be the proper domain of the board to determine how organizations are classified for the purpose of payment of fees, and to explicitly call out the taxable status of an organization in the NRPM to determine fee structure is, in my opinion, wholly inappropriate, particularly considering that the ARIN service region may include countries in which the proposed NRPM language is not applicable. So I think it's important that the board have the leeway to develop the most appropriate language and policy for determining the fee structure for critical infrastructure and IXP assignments. On the first portion, I'm sympathetic to the abuse concern here. I could certainly see some potential for abuse. I would be interested to hear staff opinion as to whether or not they've seen any abuse of this policy to date. But I can see also a potential chicken and egg problem. You have your first IXP participant, and you want to give them addresses, but you have to tell them to wait until somebody else shows up before you can give them their addresses, and I can see that being a problem. So I'm not sure that it's necessary to change that to 3, but I would be interested to hear staff's experience on this point.
Okay, don't run away. First John Curran, sorry.
Two questions. First, with respect to the scope issue regarding whether this text is within scope for the NRPM, I believe that we can, in the staff assessment, make sure we address that and figure out the right way to phrase the intent. There is certainly a distinguishing organizations for purposes of whether or not they qualify for resources and whether or not they're treated as end users or ISBs is perfectly appropriate and part of NRPM. I agree the fee question is not an NRPM issue, but we'll pick that up in the staff assessment of the policy.
I would suggest that nonprofit status ought not be an NRPM issue either.
Understood. Unless it affects what resources parties are entitled to, because the NRPM has allocation or assignment policy that directly is germane to one or the other.
Agreed, though, I believe that would be foolish policy.
That's a different question.
That's a different question. It would be in scope foolish policy, okay? But the fee question I understand. The second question you asked is about abuse. I don't think abuse we see much of with respect to this, but recognize there's a difference between abuse and aspirational use. And a party that gets an address block and then doesn't fulfill their goals and dreams is not abuse, but it's fulfillment that didn't happen. And we do have quite a bit of that.
Quickly.
One question I wanted to ask is, if we back up from the idea of the difference of 2 and 3 being a matter of abuse, as Marty tried to clarify that the 3 adheres more to an industry acceptable definition, do you have an opinion about that?
So first off, the larger portion of my objection is about the second half of the text, but concerning the first portion of the text, I would be comfortable saying that there was an intent to have more than 2 participants, but that withholding the space until the 3rd shows up would be potentially problematic. I'm not sure how to best capture that in policy, and I don't take a strong position on the 2 versus 3, though.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Heather Schiller, Google Fiber. So I'm opposed to the policy as written, mostly because of the second statement that's been added about IXPs as nonprofits. In regards to the 2 versus 3, there's a total of like 66 current IXP allocations, so we're not talking about like a huge number of allocations that I think will have a significant impact. So it raises the bar, but barely. I think someone on the list said raise it to 5 or something else. That's fine with me too. But the part about IXPs formed as nonprofits, so there's far more, at least grammatically the way it's written, all others will be considered ISPs in context of the larger 4.4 section implies that the folks who get critical infrastructure space for non-IXP purposes would be considered ISPs as well. And so there are far more of those allocations than there are of IXP allocations. And though far more of them are currently end users and would be adversely impacted by becoming ISPs, all of us, financially impacted. So I think that policy text has more implication for the non-IXPs than it does for IXPs, whether they're nonprofit.
Yeah, you're talking about the fact that it says all.
Yes, and because, so you only see the section, the one part of section 4.4, which is part of a larger piece of policy. I don't think you have the entire statement. And so the 4.4 is the entire microallocation section, which other microallocations are made for other types of critical infrastructure like DNS operators. And so the way that it's written, that it implies that part applies to DNS operators as well. And my point is just that there are far more of those type of allocations.
Yeah, Heather's correct that, and it's on page 32 of your book that the section 4.4 actually has other paragraphs that aren't here. So you might want to consider that, both the AC and the membership communities. All right. Last comment, we'll close the mics. If you're going to speak on this item, please either start typing or approach a mic. Otherwise, we'll close it after this gentleman starts speaking.
Perhaps
Name and affiliation, please.
Phil Rosenthal from IS Prime.
Thanks.
And perhaps a better way of looking at it is not for initial allocation, but perhaps looking at it as an audit over the past year of activity. I know with some exchanges that we've been looking at that are launching now, there's a number of participants talking about joining. Every single one of them are content, and I'm a content company. We're interested in joining, but there isn't necessarily much value necessarily in actually joining when there is no eyeballs on that exchange. Now, that gets into way beyond what your proposal, of course, but my point is that these exchanges do not grow explosively or spontaneously. They grow organically, and if you say you have to have a minimum of X number of participants day one, it's possible you will never have that. And after 6 months, you'll get a few people that'll join, it'll attract others. And if the exchange failed, take the space back. It's out of a special block that shouldn't be used for anything else anyway, right?
So you're not, or would you be supportive of this, or you feel that not?
I think that it needs more text. I think it should be an audit rather than initial allocation. So as it is, I am against it. Yes.
Thank you. Microphones are closed. Any remote? Thank you. Next microphone.
So sure, the second half of
Name
that,
and
Martin Hannigan, Akamai Technologies. So sure, the second half of that, again, I'm the author of the proposal, and I put it there to clean up, I think, if I recall correctly, to clean up some existing language. So sure, clean it up, and I have no opposition whatsoever to having that adapted to whatever you want it to be. With respect to the 2 versus 3, renumbering is easy, especially when it's 2 to 3. And there are other instances in the NRPM where we suggest renumbering is easy as well. And again, it's not about abuse, it's about conservation. And the 16 that we put aside for DNS infrastructure and for exchanges, I believe at this point is going to be fully utilized in a rather rapid manner in the next 36 months. So I'm just seeking to raise the bar a little bit. And by the way, if you guys want to go to 5, that's perfectly fine by me too, because again, renumbering is easy. Thank you.
thank you. And last comment.
Chris Gundeman, and I actually just had a question about that /16 that's reserved.
Okay.
Because I didn't remember. It says the end of the policy term. So is that still time-based, where it gets released into the free pool after 3 years, or is that /16 reserved for critical infrastructure? Period.
He's asking whether the /16 will eventually go back.
Because the policy still says /16 of IPv4 address space and a reserve for critical infrastructure as defined, blah, blah, blah. If at the end of the policy term there is unused address space remaining in this pool, and it goes on to say that it'll be released. But I think that's just hanging on text. I don't remember if it's. I thought it was 36 months.
Yeah, at this point, we, I just looked at the end of the policy term, at this.
Just give a second.
Right. At this point, where the policy term is no longer defined. Heather, go ahead. You were going to say something?
We asked that last
Mike, she's going for
it. I'm looking for Leslie because the AC asked that last month, and I thought that what you said was that it was going to be kept indefinitely.
Right.
It was that they didn't have plans to release it.
Right. There's no longer a reference, an antecedent for that phrase.
Thank you, Heather, for that clarification.
Right.
And Leslie, go ahead if you want.
What I sent to Heather was if we counted back to the day the policy was implemented, and we went 36 months, it would be March 2016, I think I told you, that we would release the space. But that the current policy doesn't have a term limit. It doesn't. It's not defined in the current policy.
That should be. The AC should take it upon itself to add that to this policy, either to remove the expiration or set date certain.
Thank you, John, and AC can take that under consideration. Heather, did that clarify or confuse the matter? Or? Thank you.
So with respect to that question, I actually made that change to that specific policy as well. And I specifically recall my intent was that I believe once we dipped into the last /8, that allocations would come from that block, and 36 months later that whatever was left in the block would go back to the free pool. And my intention when I wrote that was that we weren't providing a crutch for people to hobble along on V4 forever. We were giving them an opportunity to get started and then get their asses over to IPv6.
Okay, I think as John Kern stated, it would be helpful if the AC could clarify that language. We had closed the mics. Was there anything else on just this last point that people wanted to address, or Mr. Sweeting, John Sweeting, is there anything that further input you need? Oh, okay, thank you very much for your participation. I'll turn it back to John Kern.
Thank you. Okay, we're now coming to the last portion of the policy consultation, and what we have is proposals, 3 proposals that John Sweeting is going to just let the community know are underway now. These are not yet draft policies. The AC is still working on the text, but they've received them from submitters. And so, John, if you want to come up and talk about proposals 193, 199, and 201.
Okay, so 193, 199 should be fairly quick. We probably won't have ask for much discussion on that, but 201 will probably get some good discussion going. Okay, so on proposals, under the new policy process, proposals come in, they go to the AC works with the author controls that proposal until such time as it's determined to be clear and in scope. And then the AC can move it into a draft policy status. And that's when it gets posted to PPML, and we start looking for input based on the policy itself and trying to create good policy. So these proposals are still with the AC, working with the author, trying to get clear problem statement and making sure it's in scope. Most likely these proposals will be on the ARIN 33 agenda in Chicago, and you should see them probably on PPML after the AC's next meeting, which is the 3rd Thursday of this month. So the 193 is alignment of 8.3 needs requirements to reality of business, and 199 is to resolve conflict between the RSA and 8.2 utilization requirements. Most of you might have seen these. I think David Huberman, the author, posted these to PPML, but I'm not sure there was a whole lot of discussion on them. The ARIN proposal 201 is to remove sections 4.6 and 4.7 from the NERPM, and this is the board policy suspension action that was taken earlier this year when it was pointed out that there was an actual danger to ARIN there if these sections remained in force and could be used. And basically that was somebody with any company with a fairly, really large bunch of addresses could go into ARIN and ask for a really big aggregate to take away and renumber into over time, which I think under one policy it was 12 months, under another section for different reasons it was 24 months. So anyway, at this time, getting down so low in the free pool, it was, well, what if a company that had like a /8 aggregate came in and said they wanted, or if they had all their addresses together, came in and said, well, we want a /8 to renumber into, so we have just one aggregate. So I believe that's why the board took that action. It was on the list. There was a lot of discussion, and in accordance with the PDP, the AC had to make a recommendation on that suspension, which we agreed on in our last meeting, was posted to the list and is still there, still can be commented on. It had to be there and take comments for 14 days. But the gist of the AC's recommendation was to continuance of the suspension, and we also submitted, I believe Dan Alexander is the author of record, but it was an AC decision to submit that proposal to remove those two sections from the NERPM. So that's where we are with that, and we would like to hear discussion on that now. If anybody would like to since it is out there on the list, and we can take discussion on it. I would like to hear that. Leo?
Hey, Leo Bicknell, Farsight Security. I totally see why 4.7, the aggregate, is very problematic. So I have no issue with that going away whatsoever. 4.6, I can understand from reading the text how there are potentially some problematic elements. However, I can also think of some not very non-problematic potential uses of 4.6. I believe, and I would like to be corrected if wrong, that, for instance, if a legacy address space holder had way more address than they actually needed and wanted to return that and renumber into a smaller block, they may well use 4.6 for that purpose. And in that sense, while it may tie up more address space for a short period of time, it would actually lead to the return of usable address space to the community. And so maybe some time frames and some stuff need to be addressed in 4.6, but I think removing it would possibly preclude people from doing that, which would be a bad thing.
Given that there is a large amount of address space out there, someone that wanted to downsize into a slightly smaller amount of space, such as a legacy /8 holder, could say they need, the equivalent of 3/11s to renumber their current /8 usage. That's still a substantial amount of space to suddenly lose out of the free pool. ARIN's happy to entertain that if that's what the community wants, but it would be very difficult to handle a large number of amnesty requests which brought the free pool to 0, and then rely on being able to get that space back. It could put us in a very difficult, because we have to get the legacy block back, could put us in a very difficult situation. So if the upside is seen as important enough for that, it would be good for the community to set under what practices and what circumstances and why it's desirable. We suspended both because both have risk.
Sure. I guess my thinking in broad terms, because I'm certainly not prepared to offer specific language, is that, for instance, limiting someone under 4.6 to being able to get no more than 20% of the free pool remaining for that purpose may provide that safety valve that it can't be instantly drained, while still allowing, to the extent the free pool does allow, the exchange of space, and thus recovering space down the road. It's a net gain for the community, just delayed.
Sure. No, we haven't had anyone exercise these policies in more than 5 years. So it's a great doorway to have for someone to walk through, but I'm not sure people are actually looking at that wall anymore.
I'm hoping that runout makes some people look at that, but I agree that they are unlikely to walk through the door.
Thanks, Leo. Lee?
Lee Howard. Having looked at the routing tables for specifically the address blocks of the legacy holders, especially the large holders, it does not look to me that the kinds of organizations that Leo is talking about, I don't think there are people who have large blocks of address space who would want to renumber into largish blocks that would be risky for ARIN and don't have enough space within their existing block. So for instance, a legacy /8 holder who would need 3/11s has 3/11s and can renumber into part of their existing /8 and then return the rest if that's what they would like to do. I would love it if they would return the rest to ARIN. I think it's probably more likely that they would use the transfer market for the rest of the address space. But the opportunity still already exists, and I don't think that we need to risk the free pool for that. Having said all of that, I think that any organization that was going to renumber taking advantage of these policies would not be able to renumber before the free pool is exhausted, right? So we would be giving up free pool space and then maybe getting some more later, maybe. So I agree with the board's suspension, with the suspension the board has done, and support the proposal that the AC is considering right now, and do V6.
Thank you, Lee. Any other comments? Marty, you have something you want to share? Oh, yeah. Thanks. Go ahead, Mike.
So, one of the concerns about section 4.6 is it presupposes it presupposes an exchange against the free pool, but the other thing it clarifies is something somewhat distinct from that, which is the no penalty for returning point of 462, the first clause of 462, and particularly the first sentence of 462, which states that ARIN shall seek to make the return of address space as convenient and risk-free to the returning organization as possible. Given that this has now been suspended by the board, what risks does an organization now observe in the return of address space to ARIN, and how would returning address space to ARIN affect that organization's further dealings with ARIN?
So you can return address space very risk-free. I've worked with a number of organizations to do that over the decade. And so there's no risks. The circumstance of risks described in the amnesty policy is a case where you wish to renumber and return. And the admonishment in the policy text is that ARIN should not create undue timelines or thresholds so that your renumbering plan is endangered. So you must renumber in 6 months. Well, I didn't get the equipment I needed, I can't finish the project. Well, we're taking the block back and have a nice day. So in the case where someone's renumbering out of an existing block into another one, ARIN has to have the flexibility to work with that. That also is one of the reasons why the amnesty approach or aggregation approach, when we're renumbering and someone says, I'm running into difficulties, it makes it particularly difficult for ARIN to ever predictably know we'll get the space back that was assured as a result of the amnesty or the renumbering request. But absent those uses, just plain old returning of address space, I can make that very risk-free.
Including to subsequent requests?
Including to subsequent requests, absolutely.
Thank you.
Just a comment from Gary Burmaster. While there may be a theoretical use of 4.6 to return space, I would find it surprising if any organization actually would consider doing so. The risk likely exceeds the potential benefit. Suspension was appropriate, and the section should be removed.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? If not, then I'll turn this back over to John.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for coming, too. We got the AC got a lot of good, useful information out of this.
Yes, thank you, John. Okay, we've got some closing announcements, and just quickly move through them. There we go. Okay, first and foremost, this is good preparation for our upcoming public policy meeting, which will be ARIN 33 in Chicago, Illinois, in just a couple months, 13th or 16th of April. One more thing, we've had discussions in the past that people get all excited about all the conversation that's happened here, and they want to make progress. They want to meet with the shepherds and talk about new text and all that other good stuff. And so we've arranged for a room. If you want to go from here to another room and work with the members of the AC and further talk or brainstorm, You need to grab them. There's no assurance they'll be available, but I see John and I see other AC members here. The boardroom on the 6th floor is available for people who want to do workshop editing of these proposals, but you've got to find a cooperative AC member to work with. It's on the 6th floor and it's open now through 5 p.m. So we'll be doing that after our public policy sessions so that people have a way to follow on while the ideas and juices are still fresh. That's it. I'd like to thank everyone for coming. It's been very successful, and I hope everyone continues to enjoy Nanog. Stay safe. There's some storm coming involving ice, but hopefully that won't affect the meeting within here. Take care. Enjoy your day.